Maryland. And so thank you so much for joining us. Kelly is going to talk to you. Her presentation today is Beyond One Size Fits All, Fun, Flexible Programming for Neurospicy Youth. So I am going to turn the meeting over to Kelly. We do have the chat box. I'll be monitoring that, or if you raise your hand if you've got questions throughout. And Kelly said she'll help answer those questions as she's going through the content. So Kelly, we
Thank you, Brittany. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. So I'm going to jump right in, but I am very open to questions, comments throughout. So feel free. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. If you need to unmute, feel free, because feedback is always and lived experience is always wonderful to share. So I work for University of Maryland. So here are my customary posters that I display to let you know that all of our programs are open to all. And then here's just a little bit of information about me so that you understand why I do what I do, why I'm interested in neurodiversity, why I think it's important to bring it to different areas that affect all of our lives. So I used to work in special education. My background, I've worked in many different backgrounds. I started out in human resources and political science, and then I jumped into education, working in HR. In the public school system. And I started hiring special ed teachers, and it was amazing. And I really loved working with our special educators. I hired our OTs, PTs, if you're not familiar with that, physical therapist, occupational therapist, speech language pathologist. And I learned so much from them. And then I became a teacher. I was an agriculture teacher. And when I was a teacher, I had to work with 504s and IEPs. And an IEP is a little bit different in the educational world, if you're not familiar. It's to ensure that students have the accommodations and any special assistance they may need to be on par with their peers. So I became really familiar with those. And then if you look here, this is a picture of my family. So my husband and my three kids, and my oldest, who is all the way on the right. His name is Trevor. He just celebrated his 19th birthday last week, but he has ADHD. And it was really a struggle because on the outside, Trevor looks completely normal, neurotypical. On the inside, his mind plays tricks on him and has a party in his head at all times. And it was really difficult having teachers understand how to best accommodate him so that he could be on the same level as his peers. And so I did a lot of advocating. I also have a nephew. He's high functioning autistic. And that has really opened a lot of doors of learning for our family, of making sure that he has the accommodations he needs, and that we are doing things properly to make sure he understands like social cues. He really struggles with that part. And I always say that my sister, who's also an educator, she's a teacher in elementary school, but she would be a millionaire if she were paid for the amount of hours she's had to advocate for her child. And then last but not least, I was part of Parents Place of Maryland. I live in Maryland, and it's a thing called Guiding the Journey educational series. And it paired up parents from around the state to work together, to learn together, to understand different disabilities, different abilities that come with that. And it really opened my eyes to all kinds of different things that we should be doing in any sort of educational setting to better equip our kids. So learning objectives, hopefully today we get to recognize a little bit about the strengths and the needs of neurodivergent in our programs, how to make it accessible, remove any barriers that we might have, whether it's intentional or usually they're unintentional, look at some practical strategies to open those lines for our kids, how to adapt our activities, and then think about how to create an action plan for making our programs, whether they are 4-H programs, if you're a 4-H educator, or if you're at a youth center or a SAC, how to make the programs there more neuro-inclusive. Come on, slide, you can advance. Thinking. There it goes. Okay. So this is what I want you to do, because I'm not one of those people who likes to just talk the whole time. I like to have involvement. So I want you to think about a kid And so I have two examples of some of the kiddos I've worked with within the past month here as examples. Think about a kid who might act differently in your programs. How do they learn? How do they communicate with you? And then how do they participate in your activities? So go ahead and feel free to either unmute or put in the chat. Think about that child. And then as you're thinking about them, what is one strength? Because a lot of times we think about the difficulties that they may bring. But I want you to try to figure out one of their strengths that they bring to your program. I'll check the chat. Remembering, yes, they've got like, some of them have incredible minds. Think each step through before interacting, very intentional, absolutely. They're thoughtful with their actions. Anybody else? I know you all work with kids. Some of it is learned behavior, absolutely. They learn by doing and communicate by showing and sharing, absolutely. These two kids that I have here, they're very watchful, absolutely. The two kids that I have on the screen here, the one on the left was at overnight camp with me in Western Maryland. He is high functioning autistic, extremely smart. Oh my goodness. When this child speaks to you, it's like he's from another world because he's so intentional with everything he says to you, but he's also the words he uses, he doesn't sugarcoat. So what he says to you is very direct, and you have to be willing to listen and respond in that same way. They learn by experience. They're very watchful. This young man also, it was so great because he won at one of our archery tournaments. So it was very exciting. The other young man on the right, he was at one of the programs we did in, I think he was in Japan. I was in South Korea and Japan at Air Force bases about 3 weeks ago. So he was a young one, and he was all about learning with his hands. So did he want to listen? Nope. But he wanted to learn with his hands, and that was what he was into. All right, I'm going to turn the channel. Feel free to either unmute or put more in the chat if you have anything else to add. So understanding the Neurospicy lens. And so you probably can't see my shirt because I have like my name tag on, but it actually says Neurospicy because I love that. I also love the term Neurosparkly. So if I had a little sparkly shirt, I would have that on right now. But I do have my little Neurospicy shirt on. So the biggest thing is to think about neurodivergent youth. They don't need to be fixed. So a lot of times I'll hear within my own program, I wish these kids were on medication. I wish these kids would sit still. I wish these kids would ... That's not what we need to be thinking. We need to be thinking about how to make our programs thrive for them, and how do we build those environments that support kids who might think differently, who might learn differently, who might communicate differently, and how do we make sure they are engaged in our programs. And this graphic on the right-hand side I love because this is not every, this is most of the conditions that fall under the neurodivergent umbrella. So when you look at those, it's like, whoa, okay. I really wonder, like, who's neurotypical when you look at this, right? I mean, I know that just based on this, then I fall under the neurospicy lens or the neurosparkly. But Tourette's, Down syndrome, learning disabilities, sensory processing disorder, developmental disabilities, autism, anxiety. I mean, this all falls under the umbrella. And I do want to tell you all that I do different trainings, and some of you might have seen this in some of the past, like the third Thursday, where I do it more around actual conditions and how to respond to those. I changed this presentation up to match what Harriet and Vanessa were thinking our individuals might want between the bases and our youth centers and our SACs, and also our 4-H educators. How do we change our programming? How do we look at things a little bit differently? So this is adapted and changed. So if you're like, wait a minute, I want to learn more about all of these conditions. Well, that's another presentation, and I'm happy to provide more information to you feel free to email me and I'll help you out. But for this one, I think it's important to talk about what sort of questions should we be asking. So one question that a lot of times we might hear or we might ask is, how do we get this child to fit our program? But what we really should be thinking is, how can we make our program flexible enough for more youth to succeed? And when I say that, that means that you're not changing just for your neurodivergent kids, you're changing for all. So you're adapting your program to fit everybody. So here's some strengths. And we talked about that. Some of you were mentioning that in the chat, some of the strengths that come with neurodiverse youth. Here's some others. So creativity, they're very creative. And they're creative in different ways. Some are very creative when it comes to building. Some are very creative when it comes to engineering. Some are very creative with arts. So creativity in many different fashions. Innovation, leadership potential, honesty and authenticity. You want honesty? They'll give it to you. They'll be blunt and let you know exactly what they think, which is awesome, right? Because we don't always hear that. So we need to be willing to be an active listener and be ready to respond accordingly. Some are hyper focused. So if there's something they're interested in, they're going to hyper focus on that, so much so that it's hard to pull them away from that activity or that program. They have strong problem solving skills, and they might have some incredibly deep interest and expertise. And when I put that, it makes me think of when I was at Yokota 2 weeks ago. Their big thing was Pokemon, and that was the whole theme of their camp. And I mean, some of these kids with Pokemon, the way they could rattle off all the different characters and what they represent and what, I mean, I was mind blown. I mean, I listened intently, but I couldn't really give them any real thoughts about it because all I know was Pokemon. But they were incredible and they were so into it. And even if we don't understand what they're talking about, being that active listener and showing interest and asking questions shows them that we care. Okay, so some ways that we potentially might have some hidden barriers and that are unintentional in our program. So here's where you get involved a little bit. Here's a scenario. And this picture to the right makes me laugh because this is like my child's head when I told you Trevor has ADHD. This is what is going on in his head when some teachers used to talk to him. But here's your scenario. So you have a child that arrives late to your program or your activity or camp. They're avoiding eye contact. They're not participating in the opening activities, and they wander off during instruction. So what assumptions do we make about that child? So I'm going to let you either put it in the chat or feel free to unmute and share. And it might not be something you believe, but assumptions that you've heard from others. Child needs visuals. They're not interested. Absolutely. Do they understand? Right. Do they understand what's going on? Anybody else want to add anything? They're not engaged. They're on the spectrum. They're overwhelmed. Ooh, somebody had a big one. Let me go back up. Without knowing, you might think disengaged, but from experience, they might be overwhelmed and not ready to engage and need a buddy to bring them in. They could be shy and nervous. Absolutely. They don't feel welcome. There might be issues going on at home. All phenomenal, right? This is all correct. There could be some other stuff going on as well. Have any of you ever heard of sensory processing difficulties? Yes, good. They could be having that where they might be overwhelmed by the sound. They might be overwhelmed because there might be a smell in the room. Like maybe you're cooking something, breakfast was cooking, and let's say it was sausage in the room next door, and they're trying to come in and they can't because all they can do is smell that sausage and they cannot get over the smell. Maybe they have some executive functioning challenges. Does anybody know what executive functioning is? or want to explain what you think or give an example of executive functioning?
So I'll share. I think that
Okay.
executive functioning is, the kind of the get up and go or like ordering your day. So, you might wake up and have the ability to do anything, but you're not going to put together the orders. Okay, I need to get dressed and make myself breakfast and do laundry and go to the grocery store. So putting those pieces in order.
Absolutely. And then Candace, you put in the chat decision making. Absolutely. So sometimes you might hear it also as self-regulation, of being able to self-regulate. So youth, you're not born with this intuitive just to do it. It takes time and it's a learning process. And some kids struggle with that executive function and they struggle with that self-regulation. So we need to help them learn these, the how to do that, how to make these decisions. I have a slide that's going to show you. um, Actually, I do have another slide that's going to go into some games you can play to help kids with their self-regulation. Things like red light, green light, which you would never think would help with self-regulation, but it's building reputation. That repetition really helps them with regulating themselves. It helps with those brain skills that they need because they can't just sit and be told they need to do this. There's ways to help them learn those executive functions and that self-regulation that will help you with your programs. So here are some alternative explanations and some barriers. So maybe the child that just walked into your program has social anxiety. And if a parent didn't tell you, if your director didn't tell you, how are you going to know? Maybe they need additional time to process, and that's just how they are. They're just one of those kids who needs that. Maybe they have difficulty with making transitions. So they're leaving home and they're having a difficulty walking into your program and being ready to go. So these are just some things that we should think about. And then there's some common barriers that we put up, not knowing that we put them up. Long verbal instructions. And I'm going to give an example. I was at a base, and I'm not going to say what base, and it was for camp. And the instructions that the staff were giving were so long, and I was watching the kids and just their behavior, their interpersonal communication with each other that they were having, because guess what? They weren't paying attention anymore. They had tuned out the adult. They were pushing each other, they were poking each other. There was all kinds of other things going on that should not have been. If you have unpredictable schedules that the kids are not used to, that's going to cause a barrier. And there's things that happen where we can't help that. But if we can try to have a predictable schedule where the kids know when they walk into our program, when they walk into our center, at 9 o'clock, we're going to sit down and go over the day's expectations. At 9:30, we're going to choose rooms. At 10:30, we're going to move to another room. Whatever it is, if you have a schedule, we're going to have lunch at 11:30. We're going to go outside or go into the gym at this time. Having predictable schedules really helps kids, whether they're neurodivergent or not. Forced participation. This one's hard because sometimes we're doing activities and we want all the kids to participate. And so we're forcing some and they don't want to. And what might happen is they go into a meltdown mode. So instead of having that, maybe we don't force that participation. Maybe it'll come, like some of you have put in the chat about maybe a friend goes over and starts talking to them. Maybe they start watching and then they gradually come over. Instead of forcing it, let's let it happen naturally. Loud or crowded environments, that goes back to that executive functioning where they just sometimes they can't handle it. They're not prepared for it. And if you prepare a child for it, they're much better. But if they don't know it's happening, that can be difficult. There's also times where maybe you have a child that you already know has difficulties with loud noises or crowded situations where you can have the ear protection that might help them feel better, or one of the sensory jackets or blankets that they could have to go ahead and prepare them for that. Excessive waiting. I am guilty of this. I went to, in my county, I have Indian Head Naval Base. And I went and I did the blender bike with the kids. And the blender bike was amazing and the kids loved it. However, you can only have so many kids on the blender bike at one time. And all I noticed is that I had put up excessive barrier. I had put up this barrier of having waiting times. And I didn't have something else planned because I didn't have another one of my program assistants or somebody else with me. So while these kids were waiting, guess what was happening? There was misbehaving, they were running, they were pushing, and I felt so guilty because that was my fault because I made them wait to get on that blender bike. Limited movement opportunities. Kids can only sit so long. We know this. You need to get them up, you need to get them moving, and then rigid expectations where we expect everybody to follow suit. And that doesn't always happen, and we can't have that expectation. Here was the chart I was talking about. So this self-regulation chart I put on here, and it's very small print. My slides will be shared with you all, so you can go back to this and look. I did not create this. I found this one day on Facebook because, of course, I'm part of all these different groups when it comes to anything around neurodivergence. And when I saw this, I was like, yes, this is what we need. And it tells you the game on the left, the skill focus in the middle column, and then the description and the connection that it brings for the kids. So like red light, green light. The skill focus is impulse control. And the description is players learn to start and stop on command, building attention, patience, and control over body movements. So that's just one example, but I just think this is so awesome. So executive functioning and self-regulation, we talked about it and some people shared. They are skills we're not born with, right? We already talked about that, but it's something we learn as we grow. And they're brain skills. It's our memory, it's our impulse control, and it's our flexible thinking. So one thing we could always do is, oh, by the way, I have to share, this is my nephew on the left. He is in our 4-H program. He did archery this year, very proud of him. In 4-H, we do have shooting sports. So if you are stateside, I'm sorry if you're overseas, but if you're stateside, we have shooting sports. And I highly recommend, this is great for neurodivergent kids because there's rules and there's things that have to be followed. And there is every time they know the expectation. I'm going to go up to the line. I'm going to stand. I'm going to wait until I'm told by the adult to pull up my bow. Then I will pull out my arrow. I will aim towards the target. I will release the arrow. So anyway, my nephew, I will also say though, the little disclaimer, he took the longest to shoot every time. Like, okay, you can do this, Caden, come on. But explain expectations clearly. So that's why in our shooting sports with 4-H, that works really well because expectations are very clear and they're consistent every time. But if you could have a visual schedule, whether it's in your center or with your program, a lot of times we will share it verbally, but it's really nice if we can have those reminders. So a visual schedule somewhere up, like a whiteboard or a chalkboard or the fancy dancy smart boards is amazing. And it is, we do need to give verbal reminders. So especially when we're going to be switching gears, whether that's going to lunch or going outside, coming back in from being outside, giving like the 10-minute warning, the 5-minute warning, the 2-minute warning, and then the 30-second warning. That way they know it's been set. They know that their time is coming to an end and they will be switching to another activity, another program. You could also have like timers. If you have a timer on the screen or one of the handheld timers you can set up just so that they understand what, here, I'm watching it. I know what's happening. Giving step-by-step directions, but also being able to chunk those directions. This works really well with neurodivergent youth don't just give them all the directions. That's very overwhelming. That's overwhelming to me if you give me all the directions. And a lot of times as an adult, I will shut down and be like, whoo. If you chunk them though, if you say, okay, so we're going to work on these 3 items first. First, we're going to, if we're doing archery, we're going to walk up to the line. Second, we're going to wait until all of our friends are at the line. Third, you're going to wait for the adult to say, pull up your bow. Then we'll chunk the next set of directions. So chunking is very helpful. Also modeling. So in this case, if we're doing archery, if there's whoever is in charge, whether it's a adult, or an adult can grab a teen. We have teens in our programs that are phenomenal, whether it's from the teen center, or maybe it's even one of the older youth at the youth center, and having them model what the expectation is. Here, you're going to step up to the line. Okay, you're going to pull up your bow. Okay, you're going to fire at will, which means now you can notch your arrow, you can release it. And we wait until everybody's done at the line. But anyway, having somebody else model it is always helpful as well. And then having those predictable routines. And clear is always kind. So I just added that in. All right, this is a lot, and I don't like all the words, but I also thought it was really important to have this here for you so that you just have it at your disposal if you need it, because you will have access to the slides. So adapting your activities without losing the fun. So how do we do that? And I don't know if you've heard of Universal Design, UD. When I was a teacher, that was pushed on us a lot to do Universal Design, because then all your lessons, everything you're doing is surrounded around and having an inclusive environment for all students, for all kids. So you want to make sure there's different ways for everybody to learn, to participate, and to understand. And so then there's examples. So different ways to learn. So is there a way for them to listen to your activity, to watch your activity? Is there something they can read about the activity? And then can they try the activity? So that's just an example. And I won't read through all of these because I know you all can read. And you can come back to this. But here's an example. So if you're going to do a lesson on art, a traditional activity plan might say, okay, we're going to do a 30-minute lesson on painting, 10 minutes of verbal instruction, followed by the kids painting for 20 minutes. To adapt it for Universal Design, you would do a brief lesson, which would be just 5 minutes on painting. Just give an overview of paints. Are you using acrylics? Is it watercolor? I'm really impressed that I got that far because I don't do painting. Give a visual presentation or demonstration. So if you don't paint, like I don't, you could show a really fast, F-A-S-T, fast YouTube video, or do it in person. That's that modeling, visual presentation, demonstration. And then provide a hands-on learning opportunity. Let them paint. Maybe you're going to have a challenge of who can be the most artistic, who can be the most authentic, who can be the most, wild, whatever. You can choose different categories, but then that some of those kids might be competitive and they want that competitive, oh, I want to be the most whatever. Other kids are like, I just want to paint. So let them paint. And then you could do reflection, because we need to be able to wrap up our activities, right? And show that the kids have learned something. Here's a different way. You could offer a choice board for reflection. If you Google this, you will find these all over. Another thing, like when I was teaching, I used Teachers Pay Teachers. It's a free site. There are paid lessons, but there's also plenty of free items you can download. And there's all kinds of different choice boards. There's also choice boards through different programs, like I'm trying to think of some of the ones I use. It's called Attitude. It's for ADHD families. You can go to that site and they offer choice boards. There's also Understood is another website I use a lot. That's really phenomenal. And you can look there and they will give you choice boards. But here's just what you can see a little bit of, just to wrap up the activity. What if is like in one of these boxes. What if you were a tiny bug in a giant world? What would you explore in art? Yeah, so it can be very creative for those that are creative. If they like to draw, if they like to do a sentence, the options are all there so that it's not a one-size-fits-all way to end your lesson. And then hopefully that means more engagement for everyone. Okay, so one change in 1 week. And so the little girl on the bottom right, so I have to share. We did a sewing activity, and she's one of my kids that's always at Indian Head Naval Base. Her mom brings her out to all of my library programs. So this girl does everything. And then I've seen her at school functions as well. So I see her everywhere, and she is awesome. And she's always very helpful. But we did a sewing activity where we made little eye pouches with rice and essential oils. So she did it at the base, with me. And then she came out to the library program and did it again. So this is her at the library program. And then these were some kids at spring break. This was in the UK at one of the Air Force bases. And this is just an example of, if you can see, like we had on the screen what we were doing and examples of what we were doing. And then we actually showed an example, which the little girl is holding with the brown hair in front of you. Like this was our example wand that we brought. And then we let them go and here are the beads. Here's the materials, have that. And we went around and helped the ones that needed help. And if you can see, one of our friends needed headphones because sometimes it got a little loud and it was a little noisy, and that was more comforting for her. So, and that was awesome. That worked out. So, one change in 1 week. What's one change you can make in the next week to create a more welcoming environment for our neurospicy or neurosparkly youth? What do you think? You can unmute, you can put it in the chat. Stay calm. That's hard though, right? Staying calm. Alternative choices. Love that. Absolutely. Commit to keeping an open mind about kids. Yeah. Observe before deciding if you need to intervene. That's huge, right? Because a lot of times, especially if it's been a long day, you're just going to jump in and try to help the situation. But sometimes seeing how far they can get and working it out on their own is huge. Oh, the question is, what's one change you can make in the next week to create a more welcoming environment for youth? Chunk, chunk the directions. Absolutely. I love it. More visuals, more examples, starting with presenting this training with the team. I love it. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that's the nice thing, right? It's being recorded. So you can show this to your team. So if you're at one of our I said naval bases because I have a naval base in my area, but any of the bases, then you can show this to your team. And then if they have any questions, I do have my contact information at the end. Please feel free to reach out. I'll answer any questions. I'll provide any information I have. Observe patterns in children. Be prepared to meet their needs ahead of time. Absolutely. Have those headphones on standby. That's a huge one, right? If you can have them, because if you notice a child is struggling with the noise level, maybe they don't usually need that. But if you can offer it to them, maybe they just have a headache that day, but offering that to them provides them the comfort um, and will really help them to succeed in whatever they're doing in your program. This would be a great training to show my team. Okay, so you've got one thing for the week. Now, can you make 3 changes in 1 month? And so I don't expect you to put this in the chat. This is just something I hope you get, right? You can take ideas from those that have shared in the chat and say, okay, you know what? I can do that too. I can make these small adaptations within the next month, working with my team, putting these in my lesson. Even so much, you could share your lesson with me and I can tell you areas that you could improve it or change it. The other thing I will tell you, 4-H curriculum, it's all there for you. This is already built into all of the lessons. If you are to use the 4-H curriculum, it'll take you a long way. So what was shared at the 11 o'clock keynote time by Dave was the phenomenal resources from Utah State University. If you go on that website and you download any of their curriculum, and I'm sorry I don't have some sitting right here, but I use that curriculum because it's like 6 lessons in one packet. It scaffolds it for you, so it builds upon the lessons. It's hands-on, it's engaging. It's engaging for you. It gives you all the resources you need, even if you don't know what you're teaching. The other thing is the discovery boxes, and I'm going to grab this and I'm going to just hold it up. I did this one, The Power of the Wind, which doesn't sound like all that fun. But when I was at Osan Air Force Base a few weeks ago, we did a whole turbine activity. The kids were like completely into it. And it was all of them because it was hands-on. They were having to use that engineering side of their brain. And for those who were struggling a little bit with it was amazing to have the other kids step up and go over and assist them and say, "Oh, I did it this way, try this." But we scaffold that as well. We built it from, hey, we're going to make paper airplanes. Then we're going to make styrofoam airplanes, glider planes. And then we moved up to other ways of let's look at energy and let's look at all kinds of different. So it was an amazing time, and those kids had a ball. I learned because I didn't know how to make a wind turbine. Like, so I completely learned right next to them. Okay, next slide. Okay, so some of the takeaways I hope from today, and I know this was fast and furious. I do have more if you ever want it. I'm always willing to do this virtually for you or your team. I don't care what time it is, like I adapt to times. But here's some of the key takeaways. The goal of our programs is not to create a special activity for neurodivergent youth. The goal is to create great programs where all youth feel like they belong, they contribute, and that then they thrive. So connection before compliance. And I laugh because when I was in Yokota last week, or 2 weeks ago, I was putting coffee before connection in my Facebook post because I needed coffee so badly. So connection before compliance, like make sure that those kids are feeling connected with us, with the activity. Being flexible increases participation. And what that means is when we're not rigid and we're not forcing kids to do what we want, but instead are creating these flexible environments, we'll naturally see that we will get more participation because we're creating more opportunities. Interests are powerful engagement tools. If you have kids that love STEM, you should be doing STEM activities. If you have kids that love agriculture or love animals, love dogs, love small animals, make sure you are doing activities around those. At Osan Air Force Base, they have 2 rabbits. I'm like, there's all kinds of lessons on rabbits. You could do all kinds of stuff to get the youth engaged in that. Make sure you have clear expectations because that reduces anxiety. And I put in parentheses for all. That reduces our anxiety because we know here are our expectations. We're not going to deviate from these. But it also helps the youth to know that our expectations are clear and we've laid those out, and that's what we expect from everybody. And then inclusive programming benefits all youth. So wherever they are, whatever their needs are, making sure that we have those inclusive programs really will benefit all of our programs, and it'll make you feel better at the end of the day. I know that. There's different things that we're trying within my own county, and it just makes my heart feel good that here's what we're going to be trying, is a livestock show with special needs youth. We don't have that right now. I know some counties do. We do not. And that's something we want to try. Our goal is to have that by next year. And I love that because it's not just benefiting kids with special needs, it's benefiting our youth to be working with kids that they don't always see on a daily basis. Hopefully, it gives them that empathy. So I hope that you were able to take a little bit away from some of that. So with that, let me know, please, if you have any questions, any thoughts, anything you want explained more. But I do have my contact information here for you. I am with University of Maryland. I have my phone number. I'm going to be honest, it's better if you email me because I do a lot of programming, so I'm not sitting at my desk very often. But with that, I'll open the floor for questions or comments.